Okay, let's get started. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first breakfast session for 2025. It's great to see you all there this morning, wherever you happen to be. I'm really pleased you could make it. We have a full program this year. Hopefully, we're going to have about 10 presentations this year, so we'll be releasing the program quite soon. But I'm really thrilled to kick off this year with a panel of distinguished experts from around the country. They're joining us in a panel formation. Uh, and it's a really good way to start. So um, I'll introduce them all very briefly, but I'm sure that they will introduce themselves as they work through the panel. But the topic for today is using games to promote engaged, inclusive learning, how ludic inquiry can help us navigate the challenges of university education today. We have Amelia Walker, Kat Coute, and I'd like to give a congratulations out to Kat on your recent AAUT citation. Well done, Kat. Very impressive. Samantha Faulkner, Steph Rositis, Axel Nathaniel Rose, who can't join us today, Daniel Pittman, and Stephen Whittington. Before I hand over to our presenters, I'd like to acknowledge that the land we meet on today is traditional lands for the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. And I acknowledge that not everybody in this call is on Kaurna country, and I extend that acknowledgement to whichever country you are joining us from today. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional custodians of the Adelaide region and the Adelaide Plains, and we acknowledge that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. A couple of housekeeping notes. We do have a panel today, so the panelists you'll see a few panelists with their cameras either on or off as they speak. If you could keep your cameras and mics off if you're just an attendee, that would be greatly appreciated. If we also have a Q&A window. Can anyone tell me, can you see the Q&A window? A thumbs up or a nod or a... Nobody can see that? You can? Okay, so there's a Q&A window. Somebody has written in. Thank you, anonymous participant. I appreciate that. So if you have questions for the panel as we go, please put them in the Q&A window, and we'll get to those questions at the end. I'll ask you to ask the questions to the panel. And obviously, go ahead and chat away in the chat if you like as well. That'd be fantastic. So I will stop sharing and I'll hand over to Amelia Walker, Dr. Amelia Walker from the University of South Australia. Good morning, Amelia.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having us here. I'm just going to share my screen. Now, can everybody see my screen in the share mode?
We can see it. Thanks, Amelia.
Thank you.
Looks good.
And I'd like to reiterate that acknowledgement that I'm Zooming as well from Kaurna country, and to pay my respects to the elders and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and extend that to First Nations people from elsewhere too. Sovereignty was never ceded. This always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So yeah, this is our topic today, and that's my email if you'd like to reach out to me. It's very easy to find that by Googling me and UniSA. So the plan for today, I'll begin by talking a little bit about the background and overview to this new book, Ludic Inquiries into Power and Pedagogy in Higher Education. As Stuart has noted, Axel Nathaniel Rose can no longer be here today. It's had a very sad event in the family, so let's just send some kind thoughts and hopes Axel's way. We'll be starting with Samantha and Kat, followed by Daniel and Stephen, and then Steph, and then there should be lots of time for open discussion and questions. As Stuart said, we'll do questions in one block at the end. And so during the presentations, please post your questions and thoughts in the Q&A, not the chat, like it says on the screen. If you are still wondering where the Q&A is, you can find it by clicking that little button that says More with 3 dots. And we'll use those questions to steer the dialogue at the end. All right, so straight into that background and overview. So this book actually grew from another book that Ali Black, my co-editor, edited together with Rachel Dwyer, Reimagining the Academy, Shifting Towards Kindness, Connection, and an Ethics of Care. And actually, this is sort of one in a long series of books like this Ali has done, all of which are in some way about kind of higher education cultures and practices. And Ali has this real strong emphasis on inclusion and kindness, and she really, really lives that as someone to work with. So in their CFP, Black and Dwyer sought responses to several conceptual sparks, one of which was Nikki Hari's rethinking of the infinite game in relation to contemporary academia. And Helen Grimmett, the other co-editor of Ludic Inquiry, and we both separately responded to this spark and had chapters included in Reimagining the Academy. And so after that, Ali reached out to us and said, hey, do you guys want to co-edit a book on games? And Helen and I both said yes. And that's kind of an example of what I was saying about Ali really living that kindness, sort of reaching out to 2 other scholars and bringing us in and allowing me to be the lead editor on this book and really mentoring me through the process of doing that the first time. So I've been hugely grateful to be involved in this. Just continuing that background, the infinite game prompt, which was sort of my entry to researching and writing about games, because it's not my area. I'm a creative writing scholar, but I found this really, really enticing. So it comes from an older book by James P. Cass, and Nikki Hari has done a more recent book that looks at how the infinite game operates, among other things, in academia, and particularly academic careers. So the idea, in very basic form, a finite game is one where it's like a win-lose outcome, and the idea is to end the game by winning. So we can think about snakes and ladders. You just want to get to the top of that board and do it before the other people do. And in academia, that can be likened to competing for research points and promotions, as well as learning that's, vocationally focused and grade focused. That kind of will this be in the test attitude is a very finite games attitude to learning. Infinite games, it's where the aim is to keep playing and really to find the joy and the collaboration and the being with other people in that play. So it's a spirit of support rather than competition. And we can think about a game like Jenga. If you haven't played it before, it's where you stack up the blocks in a tower and you want to pull out the blocks. There's many ways to play Jenga, but often when you see people playing Jenga, they'll actually be helping each other. Like, I think, take that block, because it's fun to keep the tower up and see how kind of unbalanced it can become before it finally topples. Celebrity heads, another one, people helping each other guess and laughing and having fun. So in academia, things that kind of represent this would be reading groups, co-authoring, and an attitude to learning as self-development more so than I'm here to get a job or I'm here to get the best grade I can. So that's just the citation details of those chapters if anyone's interested, and I'm happy to share these slides with DOI links afterwards if you want them. And just a little overview. So Helen and her co-author used drama improv games as a structural device and methodological approach for narrative reflection on personal catalysts that had caused shifts in the way they chose to play the games of life and work. And I was part of a very large collaboration, Go It All. We wrote about games through games. So a very sort of game-oriented approach to poetic inquiry. In one activity, we wrote words on Jenga blocks. They were all words sort of that we relate to higher education and our experiences of it. We stacked and played the Jenga and kept the blocks that had been pulled out with those words, and then challenged ourselves to write poems and stories using those words that we'd pulled out in the game. And then we analysed the similarities and differences for those using methods of poetic inquiry and narrative inquiry, where you kind of code the data from the creative writing. So that was kind of what brought us to wanting to do this larger book focused specifically on games. And in the CFP for ludic inquiries, we again encouraged responses to the infinite game concept, but we additionally broadened this out and sought responses to other things, including the idea of games as a magic circle. And particularly Tim Beasley-Murray has done some really interesting work on how that operates in higher education. We also encourage people to think about language games, games of power, knowledge, truth. That's a very Foucauldian approach, and radical efforts to change the game and create sort of more inclusivity, more opportunities, more ways of playing those fun infinite games. We also acknowledge that games can be a form of public pedagogy, and by that we mean the learning that happens outside of education in the formal sense. So Henry Giroux has written a lot about how sort of films and books and other things subtly educate us, and games are a great example of that. You know, Snakes and Ladders was invented to teach morality. And then we wanted to think about, well, how then does that relate to these uses of games as pedagogy? So what is ludic inquiry? This was a term we came up with when we were developing the CFP and the publishing pitch. It's kind of one of those things where we sort of said it and then had to figure out what it was. But by ludic, we were getting at that idea of games and also gesturing towards precedents for this kind of work, such as the fields of ludics as humanistic inquiry, also ludology, ludicology. There's a whole lot of sort of interesting subtle differences between them, but I don't want to go too heavy into that theory now because I really want to make space for our wonderful chapter contributors to talk about their work. By inquiry, we were thinking specifically about Laurel Richardson's approach to writing as inquiry, and this is a creative analytical process that invites people in and opens spaces for learning about the social. So ludic inquiry, it broadly signals uses of games in learning and research that embrace this joyful, quirky, relational, unexpected, and potentially risky or subversive form of data generation, analysis, and knowledge creation. Then there's the so what to this, because of course, pedagogical uses of games and play are extremely precedented. Vygotsky is an obvious name that comes to mind, and sort of been doing this since the 1930s. And then, contemporary, there's a lot of this work on smart pedagogies, and particularly people using computer games and things. So why do we need another book and another kind of term for this? And certainly these things all inform and come into ludic inquiry, but ludic inquiry also is articulating these theories with the theory on the infinite games and magic circles, as well as creative research methods and methodologies such as writing as inquiry, as I just mentioned, but also poetic inquiry, narrative inquiry, and practice-led research or arts-based research generally. Another focus that was really important to us was the way in which it raises issues of power, access, and inclusion, because games just are so linked to power. And you see this in our language all the time, not just games of power, but we talk about, you got played, or can you change the game, and all these kinds of idioms. It's because there is that yeah, that strong linkage between games and power. And so games actually make a really interesting way to look at power and to look at how we can make formal education and other social spaces more inclusive, more accessible, more equitable places for more people. And so that's basically what our panelists will be talking about today. As I mentioned before, Axel is not able to join us, but I did just want to leave them on the screen because Axel is a fantastic young researcher. He has just finished his PhD, but already has a lot of publications out there, including the co-authored publication in this book, but also others. So look him up on academia.edu or ResearchGate if you're interested in sort of queer inclusivity or neurodiverse inclusivity in higher education. Axel has some really interesting insights into these things. And that brings us to Samantha Faulkner and Kat Cute. So Samantha is a Torres Strait Islander and Aboriginal woman. She is the author of Lifelong Ali Drummond, A Life in the Torres Strait, and editor of Pamley, Torres Strait Islanders in Canberra, and Growing Up Torres Strait Islander in Australia. And her poetry and short stories are published nationally and internationally. Kat Cute is descended from seafarers of Aboriginal and Celtic origin. Kat is a senior lecturer in the Faculty of Science and Technology at Charles Darwin University. She works with Aboriginal communities for online language learning, story sharing, and data analysis as a way for Aboriginal culture and knowledge to be acknowledged and integrated into Australian engineering approaches. So huge thanks, Samantha and Kat, for being here today, and I will hand over to you.
Well, thank you, Samantha. Do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Thanks everyone, and lovely to be with you this morning. And I'm just acknowledging I'm on Ngunnawal country, otherwise known as Canberra as well too. And I found it interesting, and it was great to work with Kat and together across the country on a chapter as well to contribute to this publication. I think for me personally, I found it a bit difficult to address what sort of like the definition and the interchange between games and play as a Torres Strait Islander and Aboriginal woman. The words and the concept and the meanings. So even looking at what the word means. I mentioned going back to Torres Strait Creole. It also means to muck around. So to have fun. So I guess for me it was game was a bit more confrontational and that hard style of learning, competition, whereas play was a bit more fun. That you may learn, but that they might be some kind of unintentional learning along the way that you don't know that you're learning, but you are having fun, but also bringing others with you as well too. So it allowed me to go back and even consider my childhood growing up on Thursday Island on Wyburn and what play looked like for me then, and playing games, but I guess trying to recall what those games were, and some of them aren't played today as well too, and what that means for the future. So I think it allowed a bit of space for that to happen. So I'll leave it there and ask Kat to provide some comments.
Thank you. Yes, I'm coming from Garamilla, which is Larrakia country, or known as Darwin. And yeah, it was great doing the chapter because as First Nations, we're just keen that we integrate all Australians into our culture and our play. We really want this to be immersive, the way of learning, a different approach. And our games, has been mentioned, our culture is often much more collaborative, much more the infinite games than the competitive games. And it's interesting that people understand that these games affect the upbringing of our children, how they relate to power and influence. And particularly the games that I'm interested in are just storytelling games, because we're great storytellers, and it's a way to immerse you in the environment, to understand what's happening for people in that environment, what's happening for the country. And so we use storytelling a lot for knowledge sharing, and that is a play. So it's all about knowledge sharing. Most languages don't have a word for work. There's no division between work and daily activity. It's just having fun. But how to make that more playful so that the younger get involved and grow up into that way of life is our aspiration. And we want to share that through our university teaching. So I think this book's really valuable. A lot of stories to promote that in education. I just wish I could be a little more jokey in my lecturing, not always sort of, how are the students going? Are they understanding? All serious stuff. But yeah, more jokes and more wordplay. Puns are really good fun. So yeah, thank you, Amelia.
Thank you both. Shall I switch to the next presenter?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I'll just share my screen again. So I've got the bios for people to read as I read them out. So our next presenters are Daniel Pittman and Stephen Whittington. Daniel Pittman lectures in Sonic Arts at the Elder Conservatorium of Music. His research incorporates assimilating immersive and environmental technologies into music making. Dan's most recent piece for AI piece for Terpsichore, composed with Iran Sanadeh, debuted in Hamburg and later Boston at the Tenor Conference 2023. Stephen Whittington is a composer, performer, writer, and music critic. He is head of Sonic Arts at the Elder Conservatorium of Music, where he teaches composition and music theory and supervises master's and PhD students. As a pianist, he has an international reputation as an interpreter of the music of contemporary composers. Daniel and Stephen, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Amelia, and it's a great pleasure to be here to talk about the chapter that Dan and I wrote together for this book. There was a game-playing element to the writing of our chapter because neither of us had ever co-authored a piece of writing before, and so we had to kind of make up the process as we went along and learn how to work together and play together in order to produce something which I hope is a coherent piece of writing. If you've read that chapter, you'll realize that it's a kind of dialogue between us. And that was the format that seemed to work best. The chapter describes a class which we have taught together for a number of years, a class which is directed at students in our Sonic Arts program, which is concerned with the use of contemporary technology largely in the creation and production of music. The history of that course, I'll just very briefly outline to you, actually goes back a bit more than 20 years when I was teaching a different course, which was free improvisation, which was directed at classical music students. And here we're dealing with a group of students who have spent a decade or more of their lives being trained in the classical musical tradition, which involves reading music from a score, interpreting that score while remaining strictly confined by the way in which the music is defined by the text, by the score. I set out with that course to free students from being tied to a literal interpretation of a text by teaching them improvisation. And I adopted a kind of game-playing strategy for that, which had a number of different things which subsequently were inherited by the course that Dan and I taught together. My own conviction about the importance of play goes back quite a few decades to reading Johann Huizinga's book, classic book, Homo Ludens, where he identifies play as being one of the defining characteristics of humanity in general, which is why he adopted the title Homo Ludens as a kind of reference to the usual reference to the human species, which is Homo sapiens. One of the features of that earlier course was asking the students to keep a diary of the course throughout, a diary which they shared with the teachers of the course, which I was the primary one. And this involved a particular kind of direct feedback, which proved to be incredibly valuable. I mean, we have a quantitative kind of student feedback system in our university, and I guess probably most universities have as well, which is a kind of Likert scale quantitative feedback where students fill in forms, but our experience, my experience, I think possibly all of our experience of that kind of feedback is that its usefulness is very limited. When students are free to write about how they experience the course, then we get a very different qualitative kind of feedback, which we have found immensely useful, immensely valuable. And we've continued that idea into the new course, which we call Sonic Arts in Practice, which has been running now for about 10 years, and which my co-author Dan has been involved very closely with for at least the past 5 years or thereabouts. The game playing element of the course involves setting students tasks which are defined by certain kinds of rules, first of all, and those rules are not fixed and not absolute. They change from year to year, which is perhaps a slightly unusual approach, and the rules often are designed to place limitations on the student, but limitations which are ultimately liberating, in the sense that the limitations are designed from year to year to take students out of the normal place in which they work, out of the habits that have been formed over years, and to think differently about what they are being asked to do. That's a really important part of it. The rules can be very clear sometimes in what they tell the students they are working with. Sometimes they can be less clear and subject to interpretation. Another thing I'll say about the rules is that anybody who works in any creative pursuit knows that progress, if I can call it that loosely, is often made not by observing the rules, but by breaking them. So we have to allow within the limitations or guidelines that we place upon students the possibility of creatively breaking the rules which we have set, which is in itself an interesting kind of experience. In addition to that kind of rule-making structure, we have something much less easy to define, which I would call the ethos of the class, which is rules that are about how relationships between participants work, but they're not specifically spelled out. They are gained through the kind of social interactions that happen within that group. A couple of other features of the class I mentioned is that our class involves students in all 3 years of their bachelor degree. The students work in groups, and the groups are mixed groups from first year, second year, and third year. So we're attempting to develop a different kind of relationship between students, not one where division into different levels of experience and knowledge means that those students are separated, but actually something which brings them together. So that's a broad outline of what we've been doing in the class. And if Dan is there, I'll ask him to step in at this point and tell you a little more about this. Dan, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks, Stephen. And cheers, everyone, for coming out today. Yeah, the course finds itself in an interesting place at the moment. Obviously, I've come on board quite a bit later. And having worked in a place, sort of called the conservatorium and learning teaching methods that are fairly straightforward classroom syllabus driven structures, when I stepped into Sonic Arts and practice and watch students be given a kind of job like go away and come back in an hour and perform a piece of music, but you're not allowed to use any instruments or something. And just watching their minds kind of explode, and then they go away and somehow they manage to overcome that paralysis and come back and do some kind of performance. This kind of challenge, these kinds of rules are definitely not designed to limit what they can do. They're definitely designed to put them out into a place where they can do something completely outside their normalness, but in a funny way, offer far more, freedom in their thinking. When I came along, one of the sort of difficulties was taking these incredibly abstract ideas, and a lot of the students in this course don't have very formal instrument training or composition training. Getting them to produce confidently a piece of music of some kind, to develop into a performance of some kind, and then carry that right through to a technical concert production that we can kind of brand as an Elder Conservatorium concert. Sort of could sometimes create a lot of stress and that kind of thing. So we have developing a few different ways of approaching that don't structure things too much or don't sort of imply some kind of syllabus on the students, but provide sort of open pathways for them to explore different roles. One of the more recent additions to the course is each student in the ensemble takes on a professional role as a kind of secondary role. That could be like a technical production role, a management role, a sort of creative directing role, or some sort of role as maybe some sort of virtuoso, or perhaps a stage production or film production role to generate materials for the performances that they do. Initially, it was quite strict. There were these set roles you could take, and I wanted to try and make it so that, each year that you would repeat the course in year 1, 2, and 3, as you go around and around, you could try something different. But we've found that the structure needs to be loosened more. So we sort of just have these now sort of 4 vague roles, the production crew do whatever your group needs you to do. It might be operating a giant puppet. It might be holding, a giant lighting board up. It might be sending a projector of a black hole onto the roof. We're not, the students come up with all of this stuff. So the flexibility around these rules needs to be is equally enforced, like our expectations do, as well as the still adhering to the ethos, which often the rules don't necessarily adhere to if you follow them to the word. So yeah, when I came to this course, I was very, very surprised, especially the generational passing of knowledge from each group as they went through first years, working their way through, having done the course a few times, produced a few different concerts, very different concerts, and then becoming leadership by the end of it. We kind of have this, and this is what we've sort of named the chapter after is the idea that they start off in this kind of role play role where they almost feel like they're pretending to be a musician or they're pretending to be a promoter. And by the end of it, they are quite literally doing it, to the point where we've had some groups had, a lot of success. One group threatened to land a record deal at one point, which we were kind of like, whoa, chill. Yeah, this role play element, it kind of reminds me a little bit of, young cubs sort of rolling around and wrestling with each other, and practicing the skills that they need a little bit later on. Probably the biggest challenge in this course at the moment is in the kind of post-COVID is recognizing why this kind of learning is valuable to students. It offers them this sort of almost unique opportunity to invest in this course the way they want to get what they want out of it. They get to choose their own creative concepts. They get to pursue the kinds of skills they want to learn. And so the journaling and the feedback system that can't just be sort of like numbers and Likert scales and things really helps them write their own contract about what they're going to do and to achieve success. And in that, we found that the gameplay and the rule making and the role play becomes ludic, increasingly ludic. Sometimes it almost seems like a game show at times. If you can imagine a game show as a way to, red faces or something like that, as a way to sort of generate content towards a concert at the end of the year. So yeah, that's largely what the chapter talks about. In our strange little dual ethnography or informal dual ethnography. Um, yeah, and I suppose the lens here that we're presenting is the lens that course design sort of normally doesn't incorporate these kinds of elements that are long evolved. So we sort of had to analyze the course in hindsight to really extract this information and find out what made it so robust.
Yes, thanks, Dan. One of the things I suppose we have, the challenges that we face in presenting a course like this, which has such a strong game playing element and even encourages students to break the rules that the course itself has created, is that it doesn't necessarily fit very well within some of the expectations of contemporary universities, which I personally find quite constrictive at times, but we have managed to negotiate that successfully up to date and hope to continue in the same spirit in the future. I think that's all we have to say for now. Hand it over to our next presenters.
Thank you, Dan and Stephen. That was fantastic. And we have one more panelist to go. I'll just share again. So our next speaker is Steph Rositas. Steph is finishing up their master's thesis at University of South Australia on Kaurna country. They're passionate about social justice, gender, early childhood teaching, and the social and political context that surround and produce schooling. They enjoy creative writing as well as serious writing for research. And thank you, Steph.
Hi, thanks, Amelia. I found that bio funny today. I always find my bios funny, not anyone else's, because I thought it doesn't say bogan anywhere in there. And this is me being upfront about that I'm not the sort of person that you would really expect to see in academia in many ways. And my opportunity to write about that in my chapter of this book. So here to kick neoliberalism in the balls, the bogan in the university. I've got quite a long PowerPoint because I used it for a conference a while back, but I'll skip through it because you can always read the chapter, and I hope you will. I came into this with double imposter syndrome because on the one hand, what the hell am I doing in academia? Like people like me shouldn't really be here. But on the other hand, am I bogan enough? The other people who were living in Taparoo, Kilburn, Salisbury East, Davo Park, all those places, didn't get here. Some of them hopefully did, but like maybe I had some advantages, some privileges, some help along the way that not everybody gets. And I certainly don't sound like a bogan because I've got this European background as well that makes me sound a lot posher than I am. So I'm an imposter as a scholar and I'm an imposter as a bogan. So I felt very scared beginning this project. And then there was this idea. I was really, really keen to explore the idea of playing the game, both in literal and ironic ways. I am always here to have a good time. I am always here to have a laugh. But at the same time, there's also that dark side of playing the game. You can lose. And you say things like it's not whether you win or lose, but I can tell you honor doesn't pay the bills. And being a good moral person doesn't let you keep your house necessarily when you're really poor. So sometimes it does matter whether you win or lose when the high stakes for losing are there as well. So I went through that process, that lens of thinking about finite and infinite games. And of course, the finite game was not something I could do without. I needed a job. I needed to do a uni degree to get a job. But at the same time, I discovered the infinite game, which was the fun that you can have in the academy, not what I expected at all. So I won't go through all my stories that are actually in the chapter because I really hope that you will actually go to our anthology and read my chapter, and then you can email me and tell me why I'm wrong and why I'm not really a bogan or whatever. But one of the movements that I had to make was from a bogan that shouldn't be there to what I perceived as an academic wanker. I was quite negative about academics, and eventually I was like, I'm one of those academic wankers now. And recently, actually, one of my friends that's known me for a long time said, Steph, you can actually stop being a bogan now. It's time to fully embrace the academic wanker and start telling people to cite your work and stuff, self-citing a bit more. But also, there's this idea that we're not just wankers, actually. We are activist scholars. We're here for a reason. We are here to make the world better for ourselves, our kids, other people, random people, former neighbors, whatever. And the idea that maybe academics belong in the streets and maybe everything that's going on in the streets or the issues belong in the academy. And maybe we need to open our doors a little bit more so that knowledge production can be by the people that are at the moment kept out of it. Yeah, more stories, read the book, it's in there. But there's this idea in neoliberalism that you have to be the fully self-actualized subject that makes it all happen. You've got to have the strategies and the skills to succeed. You've got to have the right mindset, the right attitude. You've got to be resilient. Well, I can tell you I had no strategies and skills. I didn't even know how to email when I went back to uni. My mindset was I fucking have to get a job because I'm sick of Centrelink, but I don't want to. My attitude was, why should I do what I'm told? I'm not going to read it. They can't make me. And I wasn't resilient. I ended up in mental hospital, not for the first time. I'm halfway through my degree. This is a massive overshare, isn't it? Sorry, guys. I was certainly not that fully self-actualized neoliberal subject. But what I argue in my chapter and what I truly believe is that it wasn't my self-actualizing that got me from bogan to bogan scholar, but it was the community around me. And I outlined various stories of people who actually recognized, in the fuck off, I won't do what I'm told attitude that I had. There were people that saw that, maybe I did have some potential and maybe I could be steered towards using that energy for good and not just to self-sabotage myself. So those are the questions I answer. Now, I just wanted to leave you, these were the draft provocations that I presented at the conference I told you about and that were going to go in my chapter, but I've left them in because I wanted to say that my reviewers came in and they made me change them. The reviewers actually improved my chapter a lot, even though I hate being reviewed because it's criticism, but their suggestions were really good. And I have to say that they also, like the people in my little vignettes, they came in and kind of said, we're going to take you seriously. We're going to respect you. And what they said was to put the bogan back in the provocations. So one of my current provocations is how can we kick neoliberalism in the balls? Which I hope you will all do. Thank you.
Thank you, Steph. That was fantastic. And thank you again to all of the presenters. Yeah, I was so honoured to include your chapters in the book and so exciting to hear you talking about them today. So I might hand over to Stuart to facilitate the chat. Is that how we're doing it, Stuart?
Hi, Amelia. Yes, that is how we're going to do it, if that's okay with you. And that was really interesting. So many things to think about there. My head's spinning. And a quick shout out to Steph. That may be the first, actually, that is the first time we're going to have a language warning on the breakfast session. So congratulations. You know, I liked it. I'm here for it. Totally. So, excuse me, if anybody has questions, feel free to turn on your camera and go ahead and ask. While you're thinking about that, now I know some of you can't actually access the Q&A window. I'm not sure why that is.
The
That's
presenters can't post questions.
okay, so you've got all the attendees, you've got there's a button that says more with 3 dots on it, or you've got the Q&A, which is like a question mark in a window there. So the questions are there. So go ahead and post something if you like. So you're getting a bit of love there, Steph, in the chat, which is good. So there's a question in the Q&A that Steph actually posted to fellow presenters. Stephen and Dan, how do you get the university to let you do an experimental emergent course design when there are all these rules about planning ahead and doing every class the same? Any tips for wording to use to get this across the line? And this is particularly an interesting question as we build many thousands of courses for the new university. Stephen and Dan, do you have a response?
Do they know we do this?
That's a good strategy.
It might be a prime strategy.
Shit, they know now.
I know David Lloyd watches these recordings, so you're all good.
I think what we do is cover our tracks well and use the right language in the right places. I think, however, that it's maybe easier in a music school to do something like this than it might be in some other disciplines, certainly, because at least within our school, there is a significant understanding of creativity and what is required of creative people. It might be more difficult to cover your tracks in some more highly structured disciplines, but ultimately it is fulfilling the requirements of course design on the surface, but nobody, at least at this point, nobody's actually has our classes under surveillance in order to see what is actually happening. That will probably come in the future, I guess, as the surveillance society becomes more and more powerful, but I hope not.
And Dan, do you have a response to that, or are you in childcare mode? Totally.
I am a little bit in childcare mode, but I will note there's been a few elements where we've sort of been had less than ideal interactions with the university. There was at one point we were banned from doing concerts in our sort of historical concert hall. And we were sort of told we can't be a part of the concert series there, and we had to kind of go to our concerts elsewhere. But more recently, I think the attitudes in the politics are kind of starting to relax, to be honest. And I think this kind of thing is actually starting to become not necessarily like openly welcome, but I think people can understand that there's a need for it, especially when we've got, people who don't necessarily have like standard training in these classes. It could be anything from completely untrained right through to, high level functioning composer performers on a classical instrument. So I'm pleased to say it's getting easier, not harder.
Thanks very much, Daniel. If anyone has any questions, I think we're done with that. Everyone's just processing what you guys said. One thing I would like to do, if possible, Amelia, I can see you're about to say
Yeah,
something.
I think I did see a few more questions from people who weren't able to put them in the
Okay, go.
Q&A, but
Yeah,
popped
there's
them in the chat.
a question about not unseparating work and play. Yeah, and
Oh, yes, so right at the top.
there is that aspect, Neil. There's an aspect that it's you work for money to then provide by your play. But there's also the aspect of place, like the fact that you can now work in a more enjoyable place, being online or something, or you can make your workplace more of the place you'd like to be playing, so that you can mix them more. So place is very important, but there's also the power. If you're more independent in your work, you're more flat management. You've got the ability to play with your team, not totally reliant on orders from above, then that will change our workplace a lot. I'm very keen on this flat management approach. So, yeah. Sam, you got any other comments?
Yeah, just to support what you said there, Kat. I think it's a grey area as well too. You can make work that part of that grey area, work and home life. You don't need to separate work from life and play. You can play at work. You can socialize, meet friends, that type of thing. It's how you create it. But it comes back to how much independence and power you have over that world as well. And I guess some of the obstacles to overcome include that clear delineation, having rules and legislation, which I think is something we have these days that we didn't have potentially 5 to 10 years ago. Right to disconnect and so on. And using that commute between work and home to, sometimes leave work behind. But it comes back to what type of work you do. If it's manual labor, if it's an office job, there are clear distinctions between the two there. So thanks.
Yeah, I in my role of embedding knowledge in the curriculum, I guess to go to central teaching and learning committee is very formal. And they're very tolerant of me making a joke, making puns, just laughing at the whole process, because you can't. It just can't be taken too seriously because we keep making mistakes. So let's live with it and enjoy it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, before we go, I would just like to ask Steph if you could perhaps for our international audience define bogan.
Okay. First, I just want to amplify what Christine said, that, not everyone in Taparoo would want to be called a bogan, that it can be seen as an insult. But a bogan is a poor person. I defined it in my chapter as someone in a toxic relationship with Centrelink. It comes from a TV show when I was a kid, where the Comedy Company, where bogans were like, how do I describe it? Like wearing flannelette shirts. I used to smoke Marlboro Reds. It's hard. It's like from the poor areas, and seen as not having as much culture as us nice middle class people that can afford to go to the Fringe or whatever. And yeah, maybe not so much quinoa in the salad, maybe a bit more bacon in the salad. It's hard to define, but it's basically poor people who are seen as less cultured, even though there are actually rich cultures in every single postcode.
Anybody want to add to that? I think the bogan culture is extremely nuanced and diverse. It's an interesting one to unpack. Go, Viv.
No, thank you. I wanted to ask.
Hi, Viv,
Sorry.
could you just turn, there you go.
Yes, hello. So Steph, I wanted to ask you a question.
look, I don't know about you, but I'm first in family to enter academia. And I know there's a real push within our university, I'm at Uni SA, to have education that's open and accessible and equitable for everybody from all walks of life. My question is, how do we support those students from those areas from outside? Not outside, that's the wrong word. How do we, because quite often you can often feel isolated. You can feel isolated from your communities, from your families. Sometimes there's backlash from those sectors, from your support groups. How do we then mentor and support so that they can keep going? What would your
Okay.
take on
Well,
that be?
firstly, and this is where I'm an imposter, I wasn't first in family to go to uni. I come from a really educated background, like poor, but we got through Catholic system, we got free education in private schools and all the rest of it. But I know what you mean, because I have those students that I really relate to that are maybe, maybe they're not what is expected from a university culture. And I think some of what I look at in my chapter does look at that, look at the sort of ways that people turn me around from being defiant and self-sabotaging into someone who's here and wants to be here. But I think the main thing is we've got to get rid of the deficit view. I think the institutional stuff's harder, and I would need to take longer to even start to unpack that. But on a personal level, we've all become a little bit middle class by being here, I think. And we need to just not have that deficit view. We need to stop saying that students are lazy. We need to stop saying that they're not trying. And we need to, and this is hard because as a casual academic, I don't get paid to put the time in that I'd like. But we need to push for the university to offer better support for skills, and not just skills like how to write like an academic wanker, but sorry, I said it again, but how to email. There are students who don't know how to email, refugee backgrounds, that can happen as well. How to socialize. I didn't know how to dress for uni. I went through some really weird stages trying to work that out, which I cringe about now. But I didn't want to come to uni because I knew I looked different, but I didn't know how to change that. Why can't people bring kids to class? My classes they can, but I was kicked out of classes for having my babies with me sometimes. I think we should be. And we need to push for Centrelink to be raised or study to be put back. We need people to be financially supported. If we want them to study properly and actually do their homework, they can't be working 5 jobs just to be able to be here. We need to push for financial support for them. So get rid of the deficit view, start supporting them on every level all at once. It's a huge job. At least we're talking about it, I guess.
Thanks, Steph, and thanks, Viv. If there are no other questions, we've hit the top of the hour. We've just gone over, so I think we will say thank you very much to all of our presenters. It was a really interesting discussion, and a plug for your book for those of you who want to go out and there is a link to it, I think, in the invitation to this, and Steph's holding it up there. Go out and buy it, or lobby the library to buy you a copy. Anyway, I'd like to thank you all very much for your time this morning. It was really interesting. Congratulations on the book. Congratulations to Kat for your citation. And thank you all, everybody, for being here today. It was really great to see you. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll see you next time. Thanks very much for being there. Bye.
Can I just jump
Thank
in
you for having
with
us.
a very big thank you, Stuart, for organising this and giving us the opportunity?
No problem. My pleasure. My pleasure.
Yes, thank you.
Bye, everybody. Have a great day.